Now imagine a powerful dynasty, so influential that emperors bowed before them and kings adjusted their wars to match the family's financial balance sheets. And governments could rise or collapse, depending on whether they were willing to borrow more. For over a century, the Rothschild family were not just bankers. They were the very lifeblood of Europe's wealth and power. Their story reads like a dramatic novel, full of intrigue, about a dynasty capable of moving money faster than imperial armies, whispering decisions within palaces, while their own faces remained nearly invisible. But the striking truth is, this family needed no crown or army. They built modern finance, and even today we still live inside the machine they created. To understand how they rose to power, we must return to Europe in the late 18th century. At that time, Europe was a tangled mosaic of rival kingdoms and competing empires: Austria, France, Britain, Prussia, and the crumbling Holy Roman Empire. Wars raged endlessly, dynasties were fragile, and treasuries were constantly empty. Gold and silver formed the basis of money, but armies consumed faster than kings could mint coins. In that chaos, credit was no longer a luxury, it was survival. And this is where Meyer Amschel enters the story. Born in Frankfurt in 1744, Meyer was not destined for power. He started as a coin dealer, running a small shop in Frankfurt's Jewish quarter, but he was perceptive. He quickly realized that exchanging coins could never be as profitable as arranging loans and managing assets for the nobility. He became the financial agent for the Prince of Hesse, one of the richest men in Europe at the time. That relationship was his golden ticket. When the Napoleonic Wars erupted, Meyer had already laid the foundation for a financial dynasty, and he had a plan, bigger than any other bankers at the time. He sent his 5 sons to 5 different European capitals: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and to build a family banking network that no government could match. Think about that strategy. In an age when news traveled only by horse and war could consume a nation in months, Meyer built a private intelligence and financial system faster than most nation-states. His sons could move money across borders, 4 allies, borrow in one city while collecting debts in another, and most importantly, spread risk. If Paris fell to Napoleon, London still operated. If Vienna went bankrupt, Frankfurt still had credit. That international network was the real breakthrough. It was diversification on a geopolitical scale. The Napoleonic Wars transformed the Rothschilds from clever bankers into financial titans. Governments were desperate for money. Britain, at war with Napoleon, borrowed unprecedented sums. Armies needed equipment, pay, food supplies, and transport, while traditional royal treasuries were slow, corrupt. The Rothschilds stepped in. Their courier network could move news and gold faster than any official channel. In a world where a single day's delay could topple an army, speed was power. The most famous example is Waterloo in 1815. Legend says that Nathan Rothschild in London learned of Napoleon's defeat. Before anyone else, he supposedly dumped British bonds to trigger panic, then secretly bought them back cheap and made a fortune when victory was announced. The story became legend, but its core is true. Their couriers did carry news faster than official messengers, and Nathan Rothschild did use that information advantage. In the bond market, after Waterloo, the British government became even more dependent on Rothschild credit. In other words, the British government was becoming increasingly dependent on credit from the Rothschilds. In other words, whether the story happened exactly as the legend says, the meaning remains the same. Information and credit had become the new weapons of empire, and the Rothschild family was holding both. By the 1820s, they were no longer just financing wars, but also funding peace. They lent money to governments across Europe, underwrote massive national loans. They helped finance railways in France and Austria, canals in Britain, and mining in Spain. When nations wanted to stabilize their economies, they issued bonds, and it was the Rothschilds who were often behind organizing those issuances. They transformed national into a standardized market, a model so familiar today that we hardly notice it anymore. Every time you hear a government issuing bonds, borrowing on global markets, or facing a debt crisis, that is the echo of the blueprint the family, the Rothschilds, created. That was their true genius. They realized that real power did not lie in hoarding gold in vaults, but in controlling who could access capital, under what conditions, and at what price. That meant they didn't just make money from lending. They could also determine which governments would rise, which governments could reform, and which would drown in debt. They didn't need to overthrow kings. They made kings depend on them. And of course, With that came suspicion. By the mid-19th century, people began whispering that the Rothschilds were controlling all of Europe. Were they secretly running the British Empire? Were they manipulating revolutions? Were they replacing monarchs with their own invisible power? Their own? Conspiracies spread because people instinctively understood money and power had changed places. The throne was no longer the most powerful seat in the room. Now it was the bond market. And at the top of that market was the Rothschild family. What most people don't realize is that the story of the Rothschilds is not just about a family's greed. It is the story of the birth of a new financial system. They built the architecture of modern global finance as we know it today. International networks, bond markets, risk dispersion mechanisms, the speed of information and government's reliance on private credit. All of it originated there. It is that very system that still governs the world today, even though the family's power has long faded. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschilds had reached the height of their influence. Their family emblem stretched across Europe like a nervous system of credit. They financed Britain after Waterloo, Austria during its era of reform, France under the July monarchy, and even the Holy See in the Vatican. Nations turned to them to stabilize economies after revolutions and to rescue governments on the brink of collapse. In an era when governments lacked modern central banks, it was the Rothschilds who effectively acted as Europe's central bank. Their approval could determine whether a bond issuance succeeded or failed, and they did not stop at government finance. The Rothschilds also poured money into railways, mines and infrastructure, the very industries that shaped the Industrial Revolution. As railways carved through mountains and plains, Rothschild capital was almost always present. They invested in copper mines in Spain, oil in the Caucasus, and even the Suez Canal. If capital is the lifeblood of industrial development, then they were among the few who controlled its flow. But even at their peak, their power had limits. Other banking dynasties like Barings, Hottingwa, and Warburg rose to compete for influence. More importantly, the very system the Rothschilds refined became too successful to remain in private hands forever. By the late 19th century, governments began creating central banks of their own, building more organized financial markets with tighter regulation and broader institutions, reducing dependence on a single dynasty. The Bank of England expanded, the Bank of France grew stronger, and eventually the United States established the Federal Reserve. An era of private families dominated. National credit gradually gave way to institutional banking. Then the 20th century arrived, bringing catastrophic upheavals. 2 world wars, revolutions, the Great Depression, and the Holocaust shattered the old world order. The Rothschild family, like many other Jewish families, was persecuted. Their assets in Austria, Germany, and France were seized by the Nazis. They lost palaces, businesses, and priceless collections. Their influence never fully recovered. After 1945, the rise of the United States and the power of the dollar, combined with the massive scale of modern finance, made any private dynasty fade into insignificance. Today, Wall Street and central bank are the forces that truly decide. But the paradox is, while their direct power has declined, the system they created has only grown stronger. Government bonds have become the backbone of modern economies. Today, every nation insists on markets money shaped by the very methods the Rothschilds pioneered. The courier networks they once pioneered have become the global financial information system. Their principle, that power lies not in gold or silver, but in controlling credit and the flow of money, has become the DNA of the world's financial system. This is also when the legend about them began to take on a life of its own, even as their real power faded. Conspiracy theories about the Rothschild family grew ever more widespread. They became a symbol of invisible power, a faceless family said to be manipulating wars, revolutions, and the global economy. But the truth is even more thought-provoking. They no longer need to secretly run the system, because the system itself has become their legacy. Today, it's true that Rothschild descendants still exist. The family still runs Rothschild & Co., a prestigious investment bank headquartered in Paris, with branches in London and many other places. They still manage assets, advise corporations, and oversee billions of dollars in wealth. They remain wealthy and influential, but they are no longer financial emperors. Modern financial giants like BlackRock, JP Morgan, or Goldman Sachs make the Rothschilds of today look modest. By comparison, Jacob Rothschild, who passed away in 2020, was known more for philanthropy and social prestige than for reshaping the world like his ancestors. David the Rothschild and Nat Rothschild remain prominent names in finance and business. But they do not control governments, yet their shadow still lingers everywhere. Whenever you hear about a debt crisis, Mexico in 1982, Greece in 2010, or Argentina, nearly every decade, those are echoes of the system the Rothschilds helped build. When central banks adjust interest rates, when governments issue bonds, or when markets punish countries with budget deficits, these are mechanisms of the world Rothschild designed 2 centuries ago. They created the template, turning finance into the ultimate weapon of power, invisible, yet absolute, and that is why this story still matters. Today, most people live believing money is neutral, just a tool, but history shows the opposite. The Rothschilds proved that money is leverage, power. It can build railways or topple empires, fund wars or save governments, enrich families, or push entire nations into debt. The family may no longer sit at the center of power, but the machine they perfected still operates there, and if you don't understand how it works, you will be trapped inside it. So what's the lesson? Don't get swept up by myths claiming a single family still secretly rules the world, that thinking is too simplistic. The truth is harder and far more dangerous. The Rothschilds didn't need to rule forever. They designed a system that would outlive them, a structure of finance that still dictates the rules of wealth, debt, and control. If you want financial freedom, you must understand it. Because whether you're a 19th century king or a 21st century consumer with a credit card in hand, the trap is the same. Dependence on an order built to serve lenders, not borrowers. History doesn't repeat, but it always rhymes, and the rhyme of the Rothschilds still echoes today as a reminder that real wealth is not just money, but the power to write the rules of money itself. If you fail to learn that lesson, history will crush you with it. If this story gave you a new perspective, please like and subscribe to Prosperity Pathways. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.